Welcome to the latest iteration of Juan's World. I guess we can think of this as the Friday edition. I'm not sure when I'm going to post it. It's Thursday right now. I expect, given the way my life is working, that I probably won't get it up until tomorrow. So let's call it the Friday edition, and let's call it Silver Linings. Because one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is the many misfortunes that I've encountered in life in the last 10, 12 years, basically since I retired. And the fact of the matter is that each one of those misfortunes has turned into fortune. There's been a silver lining. Sometimes because I've intentionally sought the silver lining, and sometimes I haven't, and it just happened anyway. So I want to explore that. I also want to look at recent festivals. We went through my New Year and my birthday a little bit before that, but then we missed May 1st. Now May 1st is an interesting day because it's pretty much a celebration everywhere, with the exception of North America. It's not so much a celebration there. But in Europe and in Gaelic countries in general, it's May Day, and you've got maypoles and all manner of things that people do. It's Beltane in the Celtic tradition. It's also Labor Day in many cultures in South America, in China, in Russia. It's also called Joseph the Worker Day, celebrating Jesus' father as a artisan, carpenter, whatever. And in Argentina, one of the things we do on May 1st is we make locro. Locro is made with white hominy. Can't get any white hominy here in Cambodia, but I miss locro, so I made my own version this year, using the white corn that I could find in the marketplaces. And so I'm going to end up talking about locro after I've talked about silver linings. Let's get started. Now, the most recent silver lining was really curious. I had 3 book contracts last year, possibly 4, but certainly 3 that were on the table, and one of them still continues, and 2 died, which, not a disaster, but I mean, it's not great, because publishers don't just spring out of the woodwork and say, like, what kind of books you got? Let me publish them immediately. Rather, you've got to go crawling to them and begging, and sometimes even giving them money and all kinds of things, because publishing is a terrible, terrible scenario these days. You used to be able to, like, pretty much write a coherent manuscript, and of course a lot of people are not very coherent when they write, but if you wrote a coherent manuscript that had some merit, chances are the first or second publisher would pick it up. Now I'm talking about the 70s and 80s. Come down to the 90s and that's not true. You come into the 90s and publishers are saying, how much money am I going to make if I publish this book? And that's it. Long gone are the days when a publisher would look at the digestive system of the penguin and say, well, I'm probably only going to sell 3 of these a year, but I'm going to publish it anyway because it has merit. They don't do that anymore. 3 books a year ain't going to work. So they are expecting that you're going to produce a manuscript that at the barest minimum is going to break even, and break even pretty quickly. That is, if they've put out, let's say, the equivalent of the cost of 10,000 books, then they want you to be able to sell 10,000 books in the next year or 2. And if you can't promise that, then they're not interested. And they don't take risks. They look at a book and they say, well, you know, it's kind of interesting and it might sell, but who knows? So I'm going to reject it. And that's what happened in famous cases, like in J.K. Rowling's case, where she tried to sell Harry Potter over and over and over and nobody would buy it. And then finally somebody took a risk. And then when they took a risk, then other publishers said, oh, magic is selling, so anyone got any magic to sell? You know, that's how the publishing world works these days. So I had 3 contracts. The one with a very, very prestigious press, which I was quite proud of, but it was not my doing, it was my co-author's doing. We had proposed a book on holistic anthropology that we wrote jointly. And this big publisher said, okay, give it to us in a year. And I said, all right, fine. But 6 months later, I had produced about 80% of the book. My co-author had produced about 5%. And some editing of my work, but not much. And then time went on, and we got closer and closer to the deadline, and my co-author still hadn't produced anything. And I kept emailing saying, come on, we've got to get moving on this. And then at the very tail end, we got completion. But I had, by that time, written almost 90% of the book. My co-author had written about 10, maybe 12, 13%, if you're going to be really generous. And I started getting angry, which is not a good thing to do. I shouldn't get angry. But I was getting upset because I was doing all the work and I wasn't really getting any credit for it. And then my co-author started carping about things that I had done. One of them was, for example, that I spoke about the medical statistics of women dying in childbirth. And she wrote to me and she said, we can't call them women, we have to call them people. We have to be gender neutral. All right, I mean, it seems a little weird, I mean, because men can't give birth, that biologically you have to be a woman to give birth. But, you know, okay, I understand if you've got some gender issues, you might want to be called a person, you might want to use the pronoun they as opposed to she and so forth. All fine. But I was a little concerned because I had a lot of issues like genocide. You know, like Cambodia lost 1/3 of its population to the massacres of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. And I hadn't mentioned any of that. I hadn't mentioned any of the things that warfare precipitated and so forth that are really important to me. Daily here in Phnom Penh, I meet people who don't have any lower limbs because they've trodden on a landmine, or they've got involved somehow or other with still active munitions that the American Air Force dropped during the Vietnam War in Cambodia. You know, like, these are important. I mean, okay, I'll accept your pronoun stuff, but, you know, give me a break when it comes to things like poverty, genocide, warfare, which I've been fairly soft about. but I'm not going to be soft about it anymore. And then it got into a big wrangle, and I said some words that were harsh, let's put it that way. I don't want to mention those words on YouTube in case I get attacked by the YouTube algorithm. But I said some things that were harsh. And then the publisher said, okay, we're not going to publish the book. If we don't publish books that are being fought over by co-authors. And that's in the contract. Well, I don't know if it's in the contract or not. Doesn't really matter. I lost that book, and I lost the other contract because it was with my co-author. And that person is mad at me, and so that went out the window. And so for a day or so I moped around and thought, yeah, okay, that's not a good thing. But then I realized a really, really important thing. The book was useless. I had written, let's say 85–90% of it. And, I'm not a bad writer and whatnot. But the book wasn't as advertised. It was advertised as a holistic introduction to anthropology. By holistic, we mean it's going to incorporate anatomy, physical anthropology, archaeology, linguistics. Like every chapter is going to have all of those things in it. And it didn't. And the reason it didn't was not so much my failing, although I'll take credit for being a poor writer in that respect. It was that my co-author didn't edit my work. Didn't say, okay, we need more holism here. You don't have any archaeology in this chapter. You could put some linguistic analysis here and blah, blah, blah. Didn't do any of that. So if the book had actually been printed as originally touted, it would have been a very bad book. And I would have been on the hook for it. So I am so glad that the publisher turned it down, because now I can go back to it and write it the way it should be written. And this is a real interesting turn of events. I thought, oh, okay, let me ask my son if he's willing to be my new co-author. Now, he's a graduate student in anthropology. He's in his second year at Binghamton University. And he's got a lot to do, and he's got a lot of research of his own that he's interested in publishing. But he said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And he's been amazingly good. Like everything that I've proposed, he's got a critique. That's fathers and sons for you. Like, Dad proposes this, no, we can't do that. We've got to do something else. But we go back and forth in fairly good-natured father-son kind of dialogue. And the book's coming along. I've already written 4 chapters. Now, I'm still doing the bulk of the writing because he's got a lot of other things that he has to do. But there's dog yapping at my heels all the time. This is not right, Dad. You got to do it this way. The modern authors don't think this way anymore. You're getting to be an old git. Do it better. And so out of all of this, we're going to produce a really good book. Not sure if I can find a publisher. Hopeful, but I think it's going to be a good book. And that's the silver lining, is that this thing that seemed to be really promising that I had, an original contract, wasn't promising in the end. It was promising at the beginning, but the outcome was bad, and it should have been tanked. And I'm glad the press did it, because I don't have to face my co-author and say, you were hopeless. Although, I mean, that's true, and I think that person knows it very well at this point. So I was thinking, what other times has that happened? Well, there was a time when I was living and working in China, and I just got a very good job at a university, really happy, and then the government denied my work visa. I had been up to that point on a student visa because I'd been learning Mandarin Chinese and doing a little bit of work on the side, not quite legally, but most of the time the Chinese government doesn't care. But this time now I wanted to work full-time for the Yunnan University, and I needed a work permit in order to do that, and a work visa, and that was a long, involved process. And in the end, it didn't work out because the Chinese government saw that I had two passports. I had an Argentine passport, which I had entered the country on, and a British passport, which is where I was trying to get my work visa, because I was teaching English, and having an Argentine passport was not a very good qualification for teaching English. So I thought, well, use the UK passport, and also because it's easier for me to get things like update of my police record or lack of it and so forth from the British than from the Argentine government, which is a nightmare of red tape. So they threw me out. They gave me 10 days to leave the country. And I had a beautiful job. It was a wonderful job. It was a job where I taught, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 hours a week, plus a couple of extra things that I had to do on the side, what they called social club, you know, where you meet the students and just talk in English. 8 months a year teaching, 4 months off with a minimum of $3,000 travel expenses. I mean, a great job. And the government just said no. So again, you know, a disaster in a sense, but one of my former students saw that I had been deported and said, well, why not come to Italy? I teach in Mantua, in Lombardy, and we need English teachers, so come along. And I did, and I spent 2 years in Lombardy. It allowed me to travel all over northern Italy. I could travel to places in the Po Valley, and I did that every Saturday. I didn't teach on Saturdays and Sundays. Sundays I had other things to do, but Saturdays I got on a train and I said, okay, where am I going this time? Brescia, maybe? Okay. Over the spring break I went to Turin for 3 days, Bologna, everywhere. Had a wonderful time. Ate some wonderful food in wonderful places. And then at the end of the 2 years I made the move back to Southeast Asia. So in general, I have this firm feeling that every time something goes wrong, there is an opportunity. You gotta grasp it though. You've gotta pick up the pieces and say, okay, let's start again. So with my book, I picked up the pieces with my son. With Chinese visa, I picked up the pieces with a former student. It happens, but it happens if you're proactive about it, and not if you just lament and moan. You have to seize the moment. So, locro. Now, May 1st in Argentina is Labor Day, and it's also the beginning of autumn, and so slow cooked dishes become important, and locro is absolutely essential on May 1st. People start making it usually the day or 2 days before. And so I'm going to show you how I made it, given that I have no white hominy, no Argentine vegetables, no tripe, which is one of the main ingredients, but I still managed to make what I consider to be a satisfying locro. So let's look into that. Making locro is a 2 or 3 day event, depending on the way you want to go. But minimally, it's a 2-day event, and I started off on the first day by making the broth, which is a typical first start. If you're using dried white hominy, then you also need to soak it, but you can do that at the same time as you're making the broth. So the first thing I did was to brown off some pork bones. They're fairly meaty pork bones, and they're readily available in Cambodia, so that was the start. If I were in Argentina, I would also have some tripe, maybe some chorizo, various meats, but pork bones are enough. Brown them off very well in extra virgin olive oil, then into a simmering pot, and let them simmer away with some other vegetables. In this case I use leeks. I've become totally attached to leeks, but it could be onions, could be shallots, doesn't really matter. Some garlic maybe, but you just want to get that pot simmering, and you want to keep that going for several hours if you can. Then you can add some other ingredients. Locro normally has some white beans in it, so the basic ingredients are white hominy and white beans, and meat, and then vegetables. So I added some beans to the pot and some other things, and eventually I added some vegetables, a whole variety of vegetables that I can find here in Cambodia, almost none of which I would use in Argentina. In Argentina I would use some kind of squashes, what they call zucchini in the United States and in Italy, or they call courgettes in England, little marrows, some celery maybe, could use some carrots. I had some carrots, but I didn't use them. And then just keep boiling things up. And when you feel satisfied that you've got a nice broth, then tuck it away in the refrigerator for the next day. The main spicy ingredients are green chili peppers and oregano. And so in a certain way, what they do in Argentina is not so very different from what they do in New Mexico. They make hominy for all of their festival events. Somebody will bring some hominy, and that's spiced with oregano and hatch or chimayo green chilies. Well, I can't get those chilies here, but I can get some, and one of the things I do with them is I put them on the gas stove and I roast them, just like they do in all parts of Latin America, and then into the pot. And next day, just keep everything stirring around, and then I added my white corn. Now you'll see here that I've got some white corn ears, and best thing I can do is to cut the corn off the ears and then into the pot, and then we're gonna cook for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. All depends on how long it takes. As it happens, this white corn was pretty tough. Normally I've discovered in the United States, when I cooked white corn, it was very sweet and very tender. This was not. This was pretty tough. So it took a fair amount of time. But just boil everything down. Now I added some other vegetables, including Thai eggplants, with these small round eggplants, some Chinese radishes. I mean, I know it's not traditional, but locro is meat, white corn, beans, and vegetables. So whatever vegetables are on hand, you can throw them in. And then the last step here is just take some meat off the bones and serve up the locro. If I had some flatbread, I would add it as well here, but I don't, so I have to make do with what I have. And it turned out to be really nice. I mean, it's really quite delicious. You can't really go very far wrong with pork broth, oregano, white corn, and extras. So that's my locro. That's my May 1st dish. A little bit late, but we're not counting. So please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends to subscribe. I don't have a lot of subscribers, and I'd like to have more. Not that I would like to have 100,000 or 1,000,000, but I wouldn't mind a few more. I don't monetize, I don't charge anybody, I don't have any advertisements or anything like that. So it's all free, but the job on your part is to tell your friends, and then I will get more subscribers. So have a jolly weekend.